The wagon axle snapped like a gunshot across the empty Dakota prairie, sending flour sacks tumbling in the white explosions that painted the grass like scattered snow. Hannah Morrison gripped the leather reins as her horses stamped and snorted their ears, flicking at the sudden silence that followed the grinding halt. The October sun hung low, casting shadows that stretched toward the distant Badlands, where Thomas used to say the earth showed its bones. The memory of his voice hit her like a physical blow. Thomas, who had been dead 8 months now, taken by fever, despite everything she had done to save him. She pressed her palms against her temples, fighting the familiar ache of loss while calculating disasters she couldn't afford. $3 of flour ruined maybe 4. The axle repair would devour next week's earnings from her small baking operation behind Miller's livery stable. She climbed down carefully, boots crunching on scattered flour. The wooden axle lay in 2 jagged pieces, where years of rough roads had finally claimed their due. Without tools or help, the wagon would remain stranded until morning, if help came at all. Willow Springs lay 5 miles ahead, but darkness would fall within the hour, and October nights carried frost that could kill. As she knelt to examine the damage, Hannah's fingers brushed against something odd, wedged beneath the wagon's seat, a small leather pouch she'd never noticed before. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were several official-looking papers covered in Thomas's familiar handwriting. But these weren't the simple freight receipts she remembered him working on. These documents contained detailed notes about irregular shipment patterns and unexplained gold transfers in a code she couldn't decipher. Her husband had been more secretive about his work than she'd realized. A horse nickered somewhere in the growing dusk, interrupting her troubled thoughts. Hannah's heart hammered as she spun toward the sound, quickly hiding the mysterious papers in her coat. 2 riders emerged from a dry wash, like shadows given substance approaching with the lazy confidence of wolves who had spotted a wounded deer. The larger man dismounted with theatrical courtesy spurs, jingling softly. "Evening, ma'am." His voice carried false friendliness over tobacco-stained teeth. "Name's Jake Corbett. This here's Ned Finch." He gestured toward his companion, a pale-eyed man whose fingers drummed against a long knife handle. Mighty dangerous for a lady traveling alone after dark. Hannah positioned herself between the strangers and her supplies, wishing desperately for any weapon beyond determination. But something in their manner suggested they weren't simply after flour and grain. Their eyes kept searching her wagon with particular intensity, as if looking for something specific. "What you got in them sacks, ma'am?" Jake asked, stepping closer. Mighty fine flour for such a remote delivery. Makes a man wonder what else might be hidden underneath. Hannah's blood chilled. These weren't random bandits. They were searching for something particular, possibly connected to those strange papers Thomas had left behind. "I have nothing but baking supplies." Jake's laughter scraped like gravel in a tin cup. "Now, your late husband Thomas, he was known for carrying more than just flour in his wagon. Word is, he left behind some interesting documentation. Things that certain folks would pay handsomely to recover." Before Hannah could respond, thunder rolled across the prairie, no hoofbeats. A single horseman approached at full gallop, long black hair streaming behind him as he carried a rifle across his lap with casual readiness. The newcomer was among them before Jake could draw his pistol. The rifle butt swung in a practiced arc that caught Jake across the temple with a sound like splitting kindling. He dropped to his knees, blood streaming down his cheek, while the horseman wheeled his mount and leveled the barrel at Ned's chest. "You have lost your way," he said in accented English, his voice carrying calm authority. "Find it again. Now." Ned backed away from the wagon, his knife forgotten. "We wasn't meaning no harm." The rifle cracked, sending a bullet into the dirt between Ned's feet. His horse shied violently as the echo rolled across the grassland. "The next shot finds your heart. Choose wisely." Jake struggled upright, pressing one hand to his bleeding temple. "This ain't finished," he snarled while climbing into his saddle. "Mr. Brennan's been waiting years for what that woman's husband took. He'll get it one way or another." "Then Mr. Brennan should conduct business elsewhere," the rider replied, never lowering his weapon. The two men rode away at hard gallop, disappearing into gathering darkness. Only when their hoofbeats faded did Hannah's rescuer lower his rifle and dismount with fluid grace. He was Lakota, that much was clear from his features, and the way he moved across the land his people had known for generations. Perhaps 30 years old, with broad shoulders and weathered hands that held the rifle like an extension of himself. A thin scar marked his left jaw, and his dark eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen both violence and peace. "You are unhurt?" he asked, scanning her face with genuine concern. "Yes, thanks to you." Hannah's voice trembled despite her efforts at control. "I'm Hannah Morrison." He nodded once. "Tokala." His gaze surveyed the broken wagon and scattered supplies, then returned to study her face. "Those men spoke of your husband taking something from Brennan. What did Thomas carry besides flour?" Hannah hesitated, then pulled out the leather pouch she'd discovered. "I found these papers hidden in the wagon. I don't understand what they mean, but they seem to be about mining operations and gold shipments." Tokala examined the documents briefly, his expression growing more serious. "Your husband was documenting crimes. These papers could be dangerous in the wrong hands or valuable to those seeking justice." Working in efficient silence, they gathered salvageable flour while stars emerged overhead. Tokala's horse stood motionless, without being trained to await its master's command. When they had filled 2 intact sacks, he secured them to his saddle with practiced skill. "I can transport these to town and send help for your wagon," he said. "But first you must hide those papers somewhere safe. Men will return looking for them." "Why are you helping me?" Hannah asked, studying his serious face. Tokala was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I have need of bread. Good bread made with skill. Will you bake bread for me?" The request was so unexpected, she almost laughed. After the terror of the past hour, his directness seemed absurd. "Bread. For my daughter. She has seen 8 summers but eats poorly since recovering from winter sickness. She requires proper food to regain strength." He produced several silver coins that glinted in the pale light. "I offer fair payment for quality work." Hannah calculated their value against her desperate situation. Since Thomas died, she had survived selling occasional loaves to miners, but steady work remained elusive. "I maintain a small oven behind Miller's livery stable. I could prepare fresh bread there." "Good." Tokala swung onto his horse with the flour sacks balanced behind him. "I will bring my daughter tomorrow, when the sun reaches its height. Her name is Wachiwi. And remember, those papers must remain hidden until we know who can be trusted with them." He rode away without further explanation, leaving Hannah alone with her broken wagon, and the growing certainty that Thomas's death had left her with more than just grief. Whatever secrets he had died protecting were now her burden to carry. Hannah's adobe oven squatted behind Miller's livery like an ancient shrine to bread making. She had built it herself during her first desperate winter as a widow, cutting prairie sod reinforced with creek clay and stacking the blocks into a dome that could withstand Dakota weather. Humble but effective, it baked with even heat while providing independence in a territory where most women depended entirely on their menfolk. She arrived before dawn, carrying flour and precious sourdough starter that had sustained her through 3 difficult seasons. The starter was her most valuable possession, a living organism requiring daily feeding passed down from her mother, who had carried it west from Ohio. As she worked, Hannah's thoughts kept returning to Thomas and those mysterious papers. She had hidden them beneath a loose floorboard in her cabin, but questions gnawed at her. Why had her husband concealed his true work from her? What had he discovered that made Victor Brennan's men search for evidence years after his death? She remembered now how Thomas would sometimes disappear for days, claiming to be checking freight routes for his employers. He had owned books that seemed unusual for a simple clerk, volumes on territorial law and mining regulations that he claimed were necessary for his work. When she'd asked about them, he'd grown evasive, changing the subject with gentle but firm determination. While kindling caught inside the oven dome, Hannah mixed dough in a wooden bowl worn smooth by countless loaves. The familiar rhythm calmed her nerves and focused thoughts on the day ahead. Willow Springs stirred around her workspace, the distant stamping of Copper Gulch's ore mill roosters, crowing from scattered hen houses, smoke rising from kitchen chimneys. Hannah had just shaped her morning loaves when hoofbeats approached. Tokala rode toward her with a small figure seated before him, both moving with easy unity of family, accustomed to traveling together. His daughter was smaller than expected, a delicate child, with enormous dark eyes and hair braided with blue beads that caught early light. She wore deerskin decorated with geometric patterns and clutched a corn husk doll. Tokala dismounted and lifted the child down with careful gentleness. "Wachiwi," he said in Lakota, then switched to English. "This woman is Hannah. She makes bread for us." The girl pressed close to her father's side, studying Hannah with solemn curiosity, tempered by recent illness. Her face showed pallor that lingered after fever, and Hannah could see fragile thinness, suggesting poor appetite. "Hello, Wachiwi," Hannah said softly, crouching to the child's level. "Would you like to learn how bread begins its life?" The girl looked questioningly at her father. Tokala nodded encouragingly. "It is safe here. This woman helped us yesterday when bad men threatened to steal what belongs to others." Hannah led them to where dough was rising under clean cloths. "Bread starts as tiny seeds," she explained, letting Wachiwi touch wheat kernels. "We grind seeds into powder flour. Then flour becomes alive when we add water and this special ingredient." She showed the child bubbly starter, its surface dancing with fermentation. Wachiwi leaned forward with growing interest, natural curiosity overcoming illness-imposed shyness. "What makes the bubbles dance?" she asked in careful English. "The bread is alive," Hannah explained patiently. "Like grass growing in spring or a foal in its mother's belly. We feed the starter daily so it stays strong and ready to help new bread rise." An elderly Lakota man approached from the creek's direction, walking with measured pace of someone whose joints had endured many harsh winters. He carried willow shoots and observed with intelligent eyes that missed nothing important. "My uncle Wikasa," Tokala explained. "He crafts rope and baskets from willow bark." Wikasa nodded politely, but remained silent, settling in the stable's shade to begin stripping bark. His presence felt protective, watchful, a guardian, ensuring his family's safety in potentially dangerous territory. "May I touch the bread dough?" Wachiwi asked, curiosity finally overcoming caution. "Of course." Hannah guided small hands into the soft, elastic mass. "Push down gently, then fold it over. The dough must be worked so it becomes strong enough to hold air bubbles that make finished bread light." As they worked together, Hannah noticed how Tokala's stern expression softened when watching his daughter's growing engagement. The love between father and child was unmistakable, but equally clear was his deep concern about her health and their vulnerable position in a territory where tensions between white settlers and Lakota peoples remained high. When bread entered the oven's glowing interior, Wachiwi watched through the opening with fascination as loaves began browning and expanding under heat's influence. "The fire makes them grow bigger," she observed scientifically. "Their heat awakens living parts in dough," Hannah explained. "They stretch and push upward, creating spaces for air that make bread soft instead of hard as stone." While waiting for completion, Tokala unpacked items from leather saddlebags, strips of expertly prepared venison, wild berries, and cloth pouches, carefully preserved prairie turnips. "Payment for services," he said, arranging items beside Hannah's work area. The value exceeded her costs significantly, suggesting this arrangement meant more to him than simple commerce. Hannah began understanding that their transaction represented something beyond business, a bridge between two worlds that maintained careful distance from each other. When bread finished baking, Hannah wrapped a still warm loaf in clean cloth and handed it to Tokala. Wachiwi tugged her father's sleeve and whispered in rapid Lakota, causing his stern features to transform into genuine smile. "She asks whether bread will taste as wonderful as it smells," he translated with obvious affection. "Even better," Hannah promised, offering the child a small piece. Wachiwi bit into warm bread with careful attention, eyes widening as flavor filled her mouth. She consumed the entire piece without prompting, then looked hopefully toward the wrapped loaf. "We will return tomorrow at the same hour," Tokala said, lifting his daughter onto their horse. "This arrangement benefits all parties involved." As they prepared to leave, Tokala spoke quietly. "Remember what we discussed about those papers? Victor Brennan has long reach and longer memory. Until we understand who can be trusted, tell no one what you found." Hannah watched them ride away with Wikasa walking alongside, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and growing unease. For the first time since Thomas's death, she possessed steady work and customers who treated her with respect. But she also carried secrets that dangerous men would kill to possess. She was cleaning tools when heavy footsteps approached from behind. Hannah turned to find greasy Pete Kowalski standing uncomfortably close, thick body radiating menace and scarred face twisted into calculated intimidation. Pete served as foreman for Victor Brennan's extensive freight operations, and his reputation for violence preceded him throughout the territory. "B. Heard interesting rumors about your recent business partnerships," Pete said without preamble, expelling tobacco juice dangerously close to Hannah's work area. "I bake bread for anyone capable of honest payment," Hannah replied evenly, refusing to step backward despite growing unease. "That's so." Pete's grin revealed tobacco-stained teeth like broken stones. "Well, Mr. Brennan's been wondering about certain items that might have come into your possession recently. Things that belonged to your late husband, maybe?" Hannah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thomas left me nothing but debts and grief." "Now that ain't what we heard. Word is old Thomas was carrying more than freight receipts in that wagon of his. Documents that certain parties would be mighty interested in recovering." Pete stepped closer, his breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey. "Mr. Brennan's prepared to pay handsomely for anything Thomas might have left behind. Or there might be alternative arrangements for cooperative widows who understand the benefits of friendship with influential men." The bread peel cracked across Pete's knuckles before he could complete his suggestion, wooden tool wielded with enough force to split skin and draw blood. He yelped in pain and surprise, stumbling backward while cradling injured hand against his chest. "Touch me and I'll cave in your skull," Hannah said, raising the peel like a club while fury burned away fear. "And you can tell Mr. Brennan that I have nothing that belongs to him." Pete's face darkened with rage, but he made no immediate move to advance. Other townspeople had heard the commotion and emerged from nearby businesses to observe the confrontation. "This conversation ain't finished," he growled, backing toward his horse. "Mr. Brennan doesn't like folks who won't be reasonable." Sometimes unreasonable people discover just how dangerous this territory can be for those without proper protection. After Pete's departure, Hannah found her hands shaking from delayed reaction. She had made a dangerous enemy, but revealing Thomas's hidden papers would only make her situation worse. Whatever her husband had died protecting, she would have to guard those secrets until she understood their true significance. Over the following weeks, Hannah's arrangement with Tokala developed into something deeper than simple commerce. Wachiwi's health improved steadily under the influence of regular nutritious meals, and the child's natural intelligence began to flourish. She learned to shape simple rolls, practiced English letters and flour dust, and helped Hannah tend the fire that heated their modest oven. More importantly, Hannah began to understand the precarious position Tokala's family occupied in territorial society. As a Lakota warrior living peacefully near a white settlement, he faced constant suspicion from townspeople who viewed all Indians as potential threats. His knowledge of both worlds made him valuable as a scout and translator, but also dangerous to those who preferred to keep the races separated. "Why do you trust me?" Hannah asked one evening as they watched Wachiwi help Wikasa braid rope from willow bark. "You defended my daughter from coyotes without thought for your own safety," Tokala replied. "And you ask no questions about our customs or try to change what we are. Trust must be earned through actions, not words." Hannah felt the weight of those hidden papers in her cabin's secrets that could endanger this growing friendship if discovered. But she also sensed that Tokala possessed knowledge about territorial politics that might help her understand what Thomas had died protecting. The crisis came during their monthly supply run to Henrik Sandberg's mill. The elderly Swedish miller had become their reliable source for quality flour, and his remote location provided privacy for conducting business without drawing unwanted attention from Victor Brennan's network of informants. As they loaded 50-pound sacks into Hannah's repaired wagon, Henrik spoke quietly about disturbing developments in the territorial freight business. "Victor's been buying up grain futures from mills in Minneapolis and Duluth," he explained, weathered face showing strain. "Controls distribution through his transport monopoly. Anyone wanting flour has to deal with his organization and pay whatever prices he sets." Hannah calculated the devastating impact on her thin profit margins. At current rates, she would need to charge more than most customers could afford, effectively destroying her business. "Can't you deal directly with other suppliers?" she asked desperately. "Already tried. Victor's got exclusive contracts with the railroad companies. Independent haulers get squeezed out through rate manipulation." Henrik's expression showed genuine regret. "I can maybe supply you another week, but after that..." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders, multiple horses moving fast through the cottonwoods that lined Ash River, their hoofbeats drumming against the earth with ominous rhythm. Greasy Pete Kowalski burst from the concealing trees astride his big roan horse, followed by 3 other men Hannah recognized as Brennan's enforcers. They spurred directly toward the mill surrounding the wagon in a display of intimidating force. "Well, looky here," Pete shouted over the noise of snorting horses. "Our friendly neighborhood baker conducting unauthorized business with contraband suppliers. This is neutral ground," Henrik protested from his warehouse doorway. "I maintain agreements with all parties for safe passage." "Agreements change when new territorial regulations take effect," Pete replied, producing a folded document with theatrical flourish. Mr. Brennan's got exclusive freight licensing now. All cargo transport requires proper permits and authorized escort. Hannah had seen enough fraudulent papers to recognize another example. But Tokala's rifle was already rising to center on Pete's chest with deadly precision. "Touch the wagon and discover what happens to thieves," Tokala said quietly. Pete's confidence wavered as he found himself staring down the barrel of a weapon held by someone obviously prepared to use it. "Now hold on, Chief. We're just following proper procedures here." "Your procedures don't apply to tribal citizens conducting legitimate trade." Tokala replied, his voice carrying an edge that suggested diminishing patience. "But this ain't tribal land," interjected one of Pete's men, a ferret-faced gunman named Carey. "These waters fall under territorial jurisdiction." Hannah felt the situation escalating beyond simple intimidation toward potential bloodshed. Pete's men had spread into positions around the wagon, calculating shooting angles with professional assessment. "Drive forward," Tokala instructed quietly. "Don't stop for anything less than gunfire." Hannah flicked the reins and urged her horses deeper into the river crossing. Water began seeping through gaps in the wagon bed as they moved toward the opposite bank, with current tugging at the wheels and Pete's men tracking their movement. "I wouldn't continue if I was you," Pete called, but uncertainty had entered his voice. Shooting a Lakota warrior in broad daylight would invite tribal retaliation that even Victor's influence might not control. When Carey spurred forward to intercept their escape, Tokala's rifle cracked like thunder. The bullet took the man's hat clean off and buried itself in a cottonwood trunk with authority that spoke of deliberate restraint. Carey's horse shied violently, dumping its rider into shallow water. "Next shot removes more than headwear," Tokala announced, calmly working the lever to chamber another round. Pete's face flushed with humiliation, but he reined aside to allow passage. "This ain't finished, squaw man. Mr. Brennan's got a long memory and resources you can't imagine." They completed the crossing in tense silence, water streaming from the wagon wheels as they climbed the far bank. Only when they reached safe ground did Hannah allow herself to breathe normally again. "That was about more than flower permits," she said. Tokala nodded grimly. "Victor Brennan fears what our cooperation represents, different peoples working together successfully. But there are deeper concerns involved." His expression grew more serious as he continued. "Wachiwi witnessed something last autumn before the winter sickness. She was near the mining camp when the great explosion occurred, the blast that killed the shift supervisor and 3 miners. Hannah's blood chilled. Victor claimed that was an accident. Perhaps. But my daughter saw men with explosives where no mining was scheduled. She observed the supervisor arguing with someone in expensive clothes before the blast. And she watched Victor arrive very quickly afterward, speaking privately with Deputy Sheriff Claude. The implications were staggering. If Victor had deliberately caused the explosion to eliminate witnesses or create confusion for other criminal activities, then multiple innocent men had died for his profit. She's in danger, Hannah said quietly. We all are now. But Wachiwi carries another burden. She possesses something from that day that she's never spoken of. A piece of evidence she took without understanding its importance. That evening, as they shared a meal around Tokala's fire, Wachiwi finally revealed her secret. With the trust of a child who felt safe among family, she produced a small torn piece of paper from her doll's clothing. I found this by the hurt man after the loud noise, she said quietly. He dropped it when the rocks started falling. I kept it because the writing looked important, like Papa's hunting marks. Hannah's hands trembled as she examined the blood-stained fragment. It was a corner torn from an accounting ledger containing partial entries in the shift supervisor's handwriting. The visible text included fragments of numbers and what appeared to be part of a signature, possibly Victor Brennan's name. This could be evidence of the crimes Victor committed. Hannah said, understanding the document's potential significance, combined with what Thomas left behind. She made a decision that would change everything. There's something I need to tell you both. Something about why those men keep searching for things my husband supposedly took. Hannah retrieved the leather pouch from its hiding place and showed them Thomas's papers. By firelight, she read aloud the coded notations about irregular gold shipments, unexplained mining activities, and what appeared to be documentation of systematic corruption. Thomas wasn't just a freight clerk, she said slowly, pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. He was investigating Victor's criminal operations. These papers prove it. Tokala studied the documents carefully. Your husband died protecting evidence that could destroy Brennan's empire. And now you carry that burden. We carry it together, Hannah corrected. Whatever Thomas discovered, whatever Wachiwi witnessed, we're all in danger until Victor is stopped. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses drifted through the night air, multiple riders moving stealthily toward their camp, using darkness for concealment. They've found us, Tokala said, reaching for his rifle. How many can you count? Hannah peered toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. At least 6, maybe more. Too many to fight here. Tokala's mind worked quickly, assessing their options. The camp offered little defensive advantage, and Wachiwi's safety had to be their primary concern. The old mining trail, he decided. It leads to Echo Canyon, rough ground that favors those who know it well. They gathered essential supplies with practiced efficiency, extinguished their fire, and began moving into the darkness. Behind them, Victor's men spread out to surround what they thought was an occupied camp, unaware their quarry had already vanished into the night. The trail to Echo Canyon wound through increasingly rugged terrain that tested both their mounts' endurance and their own resolve. Wikasa rode with the steady persistence of a man who had spent 70 years in the saddle, while Wachiwi clung to her father with the trust of a child who believed her family could overcome any danger. As they climbed toward the canyon, Hannah reflected on how much her life had changed since that evening when her wagon broke down on the prairie. She was no longer simply a widow, struggling for survival. She had become part of a family bound together by choice, rather than blood united in their determination to seek justice for the innocent and protection for each other. The confrontation that would determine their fate was drawing near, and Hannah knew that whatever happened in Echo Canyon would either free them from Victor Brennan's tyranny or destroy them all in the attempt. But she also understood something that filled her with quiet strength. They would face that danger together as family, and no force on earth was more powerful than people who truly loved each other, fighting to protect what they held most dear. 3 days of careful planning followed their escape to Echo Canyon. Tokala's knowledge of the terrain revealed defensive possibilities that could offset Victor's superior numbers, while Hannah's understanding of her enemy's psychology helped them anticipate his likely strategies. Brennan is a man consumed by fear, she observed as they studied the canyon's layout. Fear of losing control, fear of exposure, fear of anyone who threatens his carefully constructed empire. That fear will make him reckless when he believes victory is certain. The canyon itself was a natural fortress, towering walls of red stone rising hundreds of feet above a narrow floor, crossed by an abandoned railroad trestle. The bridge had been built during the territory's early mining boom, but abandoned when the ore played out, leaving behind a skeletal structure of iron and timber that swayed ominously in the prairie wind. If we can lure them onto the bridge, Tokala mused, the confined space would limit their advantages while giving us better defensive positions. But how do we ensure they come to us instead of waiting for reinforcements? Hannah asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Wikasa, who had been quietly working with his willow bark, looked up from his braiding with the expression of a man who had reached a difficult decision. Old warriors know when their final battle approaches, he said in careful English. Sometimes the greatest victory requires the greatest sacrifice. I have seen enough winters and fought enough fights. Let this last one serve a purpose worthy of the cost. Toklau's face tightened with understanding and pain. Grandfather, I cannot ask this of you. You do not ask. I choose. Wikasa's voice carried the authority of age and wisdom earned through decades of warfare. The child must live to carry our stories forward. You must live to protect her and build the future. I must ensure that happens by drawing their fire and attention at the crucial moment. As they refined their desperate plan, none of them noticed the figure watching from concealment among the canyon's rim rocks. Pete Kowalski had been tracking their movements for days, and now he possessed exactly the intelligence Victor Brennan needed to spring his final trap. The confrontation began at sunset, on the fourth day, when Victor's voice echoed across the canyon through a speaking trumpet. I know you're hiding up there, Morrison. You've got something that belongs to me, and I mean to collect it tonight. Hannah emerged onto a rocky ledge where she could be seen from the canyon floor, Wachiwi's small form clearly visible beside her. I have nothing that belongs to you, Brennan. Your husband stole documents from my organization before he died, federal papers that could cause considerable trouble if they fell into the wrong hands. Victor's voice carried across the space with chilling clarity. Return what Thomas took, and maybe we can negotiate terms for your continued breathing. Thomas was protecting evidence of your crimes, Hannah called back. Evidence that proves you murdered innocent minors to cover your theft and corruption. Victor's laughter echoed harshly off the canyon walls. Thomas Morrison was a federal agent, you stupid woman, a treasury investigator sent to gather evidence against my operations, but he's dead now. And so are his superiors, who might have acted on whatever he discovered. The revelation hit Hannah like a physical blow. Thomas had been working for the federal government all along, risking his life to gather evidence against criminal organizations. His secretive behavior, his mysterious trips, his unusual books, everything suddenly made perfect sense. He died before he could complete his mission. Victor continued, but not before hiding evidence that could still cause problems if it reached the right people. I've spent 2 years searching for those papers, and now I mean to finish what should have been completed when that interfering fool caught fever. Hannah's grief transformed into blazing fury as she understood the full scope of Victor's evil. Her husband had died protecting justice, and now this monster threatened to destroy everything Thomas had sacrificed to accomplish. Not the only thing you'll collect tonight is justice, she shouted back. Justice for Thomas, for those minors, and for every innocent person you've murdered. Mere justice. Victor's voice turned ugly with contempt. I am justice in this territory. I decide who lives and dies, who prospers, and who suffers. And I've decided that you and your Indian friends have lived long enough. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions as Victor's men opened fire on the ledge where Hannah had been standing. But she had already moved to the predetermined position where Tokala waited with his rifle, while Wachiwi remained safely concealed behind massive boulders that would stop any bullet. The battle for Echo Canyon had begun in earnest, and Hannah Morrison was no longer simply a baker defending her family. She was a federal agent's widow, fighting to complete her husband's mission and bring a killer to justice. Wikasa made his move as planned, appearing suddenly on the opposite canyon wall and drawing heavy fire from Victor's positioned riflemen. The old warrior's ancient rifle cracked repeatedly as he provided covering fire for Tokala's advance toward the trestle bridge, but Hannah could see that he was already wounded and weakening fast. Now, Tokala called, and Hannah began her own desperate gambit. She had spent days studying the canyon's geography and had noticed something that might provide the advantage they needed. The abandoned mining equipment scattered throughout the area included several barrels of blasting powder overlooked and forgotten, but still potentially explosive if properly triggered. While Tokala engaged Victor's men in a running gunfight across the bridge, Hannah made her way to where the powder barrels sat near the base of the canyon wall. Using techniques Thomas had taught her about handling dangerous chemicals during his supposed freight work, she rigged a crude but effective explosive charge using gunpowder fuses made from rope, and her understanding of how concussion could bring down weakened rock formations. The plan was desperate, but logical. If she could trigger a controlled rock slide, at the right moment, it would cut off Victor's escape route, while creating enough chaos for them to rescue Wachiwi and escape. But first, they had to survive long enough to reach that moment. Tokala fought his way across the swaying trestle with deadly efficiency, his rifle and knife eliminating Victor's men one by one in close combat that tested every skill he had learned as a warrior. But he was outnumbered, and wounds were beginning to slow his movements. Hannah completed her preparations and began working her way toward the position where she could trigger the rock slide at maximum effect. But as she moved, Pete Kowalski emerged from concealment behind her, his scarred face twisted with murderous intent. "Thought you were mighty clever," he snarled, raising his pistol. "But Mr. Brennan figured you'd try something desperate. He sent me to make sure you don't live to regret interfering with his business." Hannah dove sideways as Pete fired the bullet-chipping stone where her head had been an instant before. She rolled desperately toward cover, but Pete was already moving to block her escape route. "End of the line for you and your Indian friends," Pete said, taking careful aim. "Mr. Brennan's got special plans for that little girl. Might keep her around for a while, teach her some manners before—" The threat was never completed. Wikasa's final shot, fired with his last breath from his position across the canyon, took Pete Kowalski in the center of his chest and sent him tumbling into the rocks below. Hannah felt tears burning her eyes as she saw the old warrior's motionless form, but there was no time for grief. Tokala was still fighting for his life on the bridge, and Victor Brennan was advancing toward Wachiwi's hiding place with murder in his eyes. She reached her prepared position and lit the fuses with hands steady despite everything she had endured. The powder charges would explode in less than a minute, and she had to reach safety before the rock slide began. But as she turned to run, Hannah saw something that stopped her cold. Victor had found Wachiwi and was dragging the terrified child onto the bridge, using her as a human shield while he retreated toward his remaining men. "Tokala," Hannah screamed. "He has Wachiwi." The Lakota warrior turned at her warning and saw his daughter in mortal danger. Without hesitation, he charged directly at Victor despite the guns trained on him from multiple directions. Hannah realized that her carefully planned explosion would bring down part of the bridge, potentially killing everyone on it, including the child she had come to love as her own daughter. But if she didn't trigger the rock slide, Victor would escape with Wachiwi, and they would never see the girl again. Time seemed to slow as she faced an impossible choice. Then, inspiration struck. Thomas's papers had included detailed notes about mining techniques, including precise calculations for controlled blasts that could achieve specific results without excessive damage. Instead of triggering all the charges simultaneously, Hannah lit only selected fuses in a carefully timed sequence that would bring down the canyon wall behind Victor's position without destroying the bridge itself. It was a desperate gamble based on half-understood technical knowledge, but it was their only chance. The explosions came in rolling sequence, each blast precisely timed to create maximum effect, while minimizing danger to the people she was trying to save. Rock and debris cascaded down the canyon wall, blocking Victor's escape route and scattering his remaining men. But the concussion also weakened the bridge supports, causing the ancient structure to sway dangerously as Tokola closed with Victor in hand-to-hand combat, while the terrified child watched from mere feet away. Hannah abandoned her safe position and ran toward the bridge, knowing that she might be the only person who could reach Wachiwi before the entire structure collapsed. She had studied the trestle's construction during their planning sessions and knew which supports were strongest, which timbers would hold longest under stress. As she climbed onto the swaying bridge, Hannah could see Tokala and Victor, locked in deadly struggle near the center span. Victor was larger and stronger, but Tokala fought with the desperation of a father protecting his child. Their battle carried them dangerously close to the edge, where a fall would mean certain death on the rocks below. Hannah reached Wachiwi and began untying the ropes that bound the child, working frantically as the bridge shuddered and groaned under the stress of combat and structural damage. Behind her, she could hear Victor cursing as Tokala gained advantage in their fight. "You think you've won?" Victor gasped, blood streaming from a knife wound in his shoulder. "I've got men throughout this territory. Even if you kill me, they'll hunt you down and make you watch while they—" Tokala's blade found Victor's throat before he could complete the threat. But as the corrupt mine owner fell, his weight struck a weakened section of bridge railing, and the entire structure lurched violently to one side. "The bridge is collapsing." Hannah screamed, gathering Wachiwi in her arms and looking desperately for escape. The supports were failing one by one, and within moments, the entire span would plunge into the canyon. Tokala appeared beside them, his eyes calculating distances and possibilities, with warrior's instinct for survival. "Can you make the jump to that ledge?" he asked, pointing to a narrow shelf of rock about 10 feet away. Hannah looked at the gap and felt her courage falter. It was too far, especially while carrying a child. But staying on the bridge meant certain death for all of them. "I'll go first and catch Wachiwi," Tokala decided. "Then you follow." "No," Hannah said quietly, understanding with sudden clarity what had to be done. "You take Wachiwi and go together. You're stronger and faster. I'll find another way." "We all go together or none of us go," Tokala replied with absolute finality. "That is how family works." The bridge gave another massive shudder, and Hannah knew they had run out of time for debate. She looked into Wachiwi's frightened eyes and made her choice. "Hold tight to Papa," she told the child. "And remember that your white mother loves you more than all the stars in the sky." Before Tokala could protest, Hannah grabbed a loose section of rope and began fashioning a harness that could support both father and daughter during the jump. Her fingers worked with desperate speed, using knots Thomas had taught her during their brief marriage. "This will hold your combined weight," she said, securing the improvised harness around both of them. "But only for a few seconds. You'll have to grab the ledge immediately." "What about you?" Tokala demanded. Hannah looked around desperately and saw her salvation, a thick wooden beam that had broken loose from the bridge structure, but was still connected by iron cables to the canyon wall. If she could reach it before the main span collapsed, she might be able to swing to safety. "I'll follow you down," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Now go before we lose the chance entirely." Tokala hesitated for one more heartbeat, then gathered his daughter close and leaped across the gap with the power and grace of his warrior training. They struck the ledge hard, rolled to absorb impact, and came up safe on solid ground. Hannah watched them land successfully, then turned toward her own desperate escape route. The wooden beam was 12 feet away, close enough to reach if she could time her jump perfectly, but far enough to be fatal if she missed. The bridge deck tilted alarmingly as more supports failed, and Hannah realized she could wait no longer. She ran toward the edge and launched herself into space arms, outstretched toward the beam that represented her only chance of survival. Her fingers closed around weathered wood, just as the main span of the trestle collapsed behind her in a thunderous crash of iron and timber. The beam swung like a pendulum toward the canyon wall, and Hannah held on with desperate strength as rocks and debris rained down around her. She struck the wall harder than expected, her ribs screaming with pain from the impact, but managed to maintain her grip long enough to reach a narrow ledge where she could rest and assess her injuries. Nothing seemed to be broken, though she would carry bruises for weeks. From above, she could hear Tokala calling her name with desperate urgency. "I'm alive," she called back, bruised but breathing. It took nearly an hour to find a safe route out of the canyon, climbing carefully through terrain that had been reshaped by the explosions and rockslide. When Hannah finally reached the rim where Tokala and Wachiwi waited, the child threw herself into her arms with tears of joy and relief. "I thought the bad man had killed you." Wachiwi sobbed against Hannah's shoulder. "It takes more than a collapsing bridge to stop your white mother," Hannah said, holding the child close while meeting Tokala's eyes over her head. In his gaze she saw gratitude, respect, and something deeper, the recognition that they had become a true family through shared danger and sacrifice. Victor Brennan's body lay somewhere beneath the wreckage at the bottom of Echo Canyon, along with his dreams of criminal empire and territorial control. Pete Kowalski was dead killed by Wikasa's final heroic shot. The corrupt network that had terrorized honest people throughout the region was broken, its leadership eliminated, and its power structure collapsed. But the victory had come at a terrible cost. Wikasa's sacrifice would leave a hole in their hearts that could never be completely healed, though his memory would inspire them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As they made their way back toward Willow Springs, Hannah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from desperate widowhood to this moment of family unity and hard-won justice. She carried Thomas's papers in her code evidence that would help federal authorities complete the investigation he had died trying to finish. But more than that, she carried the knowledge that love and courage could triumph over evil when good people stood together against those who would destroy everything decent in the world. The three survivors of the Battle of Echo Canyon rode home through the gathering dusk, bound together by bonds stronger than blood, and tested by fire that had refined them into something unbreakable. Marshal Magnus Thompson arrived in Willow Springs 2 days later, accompanied by a full company of federal cavalry and enough legal documentation to clean out the corruption that had plagued the territory for years. But he found that the most dangerous criminals were already dead, eliminated by citizens who had risked everything to protect their community and seek justice for the innocent. "Mrs. Morrison," the marshal said as he examined Thomas's papers and Wachiwi's torn ledger fragment, "your husband was one of our finest investigators. These documents complete a case we've been building for 3 years." Hannah felt pride mixing with grief as she finally understood the full scope of Thomas's sacrifice. He died believing his mission had failed. On the contrary, ma'am, his work provided the foundation for everything that followed. Victor Brennan's criminal organization extended far beyond this territory. We've been arresting his associates in Denver, Cheyenne, and as far east as Chicago. Your husband's investigation made all of those prosecutions possible. Over the following weeks, federal authorities systematically dismantled the network of corruption that had enabled Victor's crimes. Deputy Sheriff Claude was arrested, attempting to flee with stolen gold. Dozens of territorial officials were removed from office and charged with bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. The mining operations were placed under proper federal oversight, ensuring that safety regulations would be enforced and workers protected. Hannah's role in exposing the corruption made her something of a celebrity throughout the territory. But she preferred the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had finally been served. More importantly, she had gained a family and found her true calling as a partner in building something better than what they had destroyed. Wikasa's funeral was conducted according to traditional Lakota customs on a windswept hilltop overlooking the prairie he had loved. Tokala spoke the ancient words while Wachiwi placed wildflowers beside her great-uncle's grave. And Hannah wept for the gentle old man who had accepted her as family without reservation. He chose the manner of his death, Tokala said as they stood beside the burial mound. That choice makes his sacrifice sacred and ensures his memory will inspire future generations. 3 weeks after Victor's death, Tokala approached Hannah with a proposal that was characteristically direct and practical. Wachiwi needs a mother who can help her navigate both worlds successfully, he said as they watched the child help Beatrice with reading lessons in the town square. I need a partner who understands white society but respects Lakota traditions. You need the protection and legal standing that marriage can provide in territorial society. Hannah had been expecting this conversation and had already decided her answer. I believe we can make such an arrangement work effectively for Wachiwi's benefit and our own. There is more, Tokala continued. My feelings for you have grown beyond mere partnership or convenience. You have proven yourself worthy of love as well as respect. If you can accept such emotions from a man of different heritage, my feelings have grown as well. Hannah admitted her heart singing with emotions she had thought buried forever. Thomas will always hold part of my heart, but there is room for new love if it comes with honor and genuine affection. The wedding took place on November 15, 1875, with ceremonies conducted according to both Lakota and white traditions to ensure their union would be recognized by both communities. Hannah wore a dress of white doeskin decorated with intricate beadwork created by the women of Tokala's clan, while he appeared in his finest traditional regalia, supplemented by formal elements that would satisfy territorial legal requirements. Wachiwi played a central role in both ceremonies, standing between her father and chosen mother, as they exchanged vows in English and Lakota. The child had grown visibly stronger and more confident since Victor's defeat, her natural intelligence flowering under the security of knowing she was truly loved and permanently protected. Do you promise to be my white mother forever? She asked Hannah during the Lakota ceremony. Forever and beyond, until the stars fall from the sky and the rivers run backward. Hannah replied, kneeling to embrace the daughter of her heart. The civil ceremony was conducted by Marshal Thompson in Willow Springs' courthouse, with Dr. Edwin serving as witness despite his ongoing recovery from injuries suffered during the kidnapping attempt. The presence of federal authority lent respectability to their union and protection against those who might challenge its legitimacy. Not everyone in the community approved of the interracial marriage, but Hannah discovered she cared less about social prejudice than she had expected. The respect of fair-minded people combined with her own proven courage and federal protection created sufficient armor against narrow-minded gossip. More importantly, the marriage succeeded in ways that transcended legal convenience or social necessity. Tokala proved to be a thoughtful partner who consulted her about important decisions, while his presence provided the physical security and social authority that a single woman lacked in frontier society. Hannah continued her baking business, which flourished as word spread about her role in bringing down Victor Brennan's criminal empire. Customers came not only for her excellent bread, but also to hear the story of how a quiet widow had helped complete a federal investigation and bring justice to their territory. But the most satisfying aspect of their new life was watching Wachiwi grow into a remarkable young person who would be equally comfortable in either world. The child could now read fluently in English, speak with customers about business matters, and bake bread that rivaled Hannah's own skills. She was also learning traditional Lakota crafts from the women of her father's family and could recite the ancient stories that preserved her people's history and wisdom. She will have choices as she grows up, Tokala observed with satisfaction. She can live successfully in white society, return to tribal life, or create something entirely new that combines the best elements of both worlds. The final chapter of their story unfolded on a snowy December morning when Marshal Thompson arrived with news that would transform their understanding of everything that had happened. "Mrs. Tokala," he said, using Hannah's married name with respectful formality, "I have information about your first husband's work that you deserve to know." Hannah invited him inside while Tokala prepared coffee, and Wachiwi watched curiously from her place beside the fire where she had been practicing arithmetic. Thomas Morrison wasn't just investigating Victor Brennan's organization. Thompson explained, producing a thick folder of official documents. He was part of a larger operation targeting corruption throughout the Western Territories. His death interrupted that investigation, but his work provided crucial evidence for prosecutions in 6 different jurisdictions. The marshal's expression grew more serious as he continued. "Before he died, your husband completed a detailed report that implicated over 200 individuals in various criminal enterprises. That report has now resulted in the largest anti-corruption campaign in territorial history." Hannah felt overwhelming pride as she finally understood the full scope of Thomas's sacrifice and achievement. Her husband had died protecting not just one community, but entire regions of the frontier from criminal exploitation. "There's more," Thompson added. "The federal government has authorized substantial compensation for families of agents killed in the line of duty. Your husband's service entitles you to a significant financial settlement, as well as recognition of his heroic contributions to territorial justice." As they discussed the details of Thomas's legacy and its implications for their future, Hannah reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from desperate poverty to security and happiness. She had lost a husband, but gained a family. She had faced evil and helped destroy it. She had found love again and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Outside their warm cabin, snow continued falling over the Dakota prairie, covering the landscape in pristine white that promised new beginnings and infinite possibilities. Inside, the Tokala family continued the daily work of building a life together, ordinary activities made precious by the knowledge that they had survived extraordinary trials and earned their happiness through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering love for each other. Wachiwi looked up from her arithmetic lesson and smiled at her parents with the complete trust of a child who knew she was cherished and protected. "Will you tell me the story again about how you and Papa fought the bad men and made the territory safe?" Hannah exchanged glances with Tokala, both understanding that this story would become part of family legend passed down through generations as an example of how ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they stood together against evil. Once upon a time, Hannah began settling beside her daughter with Tokala's strong arm around her shoulders. There was a woman who baked bread and a warrior who protected his family, and together they discovered that love and justice are the most powerful forces in the world. As she spoke, Hannah understood that their story was complete, not because nothing more would happen to them, but because they had found their true home in each other and built something worthy of the sacrifices that had made it possible. The storm outside eventually passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow into something clean and beautiful. Inside their cabin, 3 people who had chosen to become family slept peacefully secure in the knowledge that they had helped make their corner of the world a little more just and a little more safe for those who would come after them.